So today I'm going to break down the 5 spending mistakes that could end your retirement early. I'm a certified financial planner and owner of a fee-only financial planning firm, and every year I help clients avoid the common and expensive spending mistakes that cost retirees thousands of dollars each year. Unfortunately, retirees spend such a long time preparing their savings that they sometimes forget about the day-to-day spending habits that can cost you your retirement. Whether it's an expensive dream car or forgetting about hidden costs in retirement, spending mistakes can appear from anywhere and turn your retirement into a nightmare. So today we're going to clarify the 5 spending mistakes that can end your retirement early so that you can understand why they occur and how to avoid them. So let's jump right into it. The first spending mistake is not using an automated spending tracking tool and monitoring it regularly. Tracking spending has historically been tedious and very difficult. That's not the case anymore with technology that can automate it. And since retirement is all about spending behaviors, your entire probability of success is based on your spending behaviors and whether you follow a spending plan, having a way to track it is probably the most important thing you can do. In last week's video, I showed a case study of a couple with $2.1 million in retirement assets. And in that example, the couple underestimated their monthly spending by $2,000 a month or $24,000 a year. As a result, they went from having a 95% likelihood of their money lasting through the end of their lives to a 69% likelihood of that being the case, just from having an error in how much they thought they're spending each month. And that's a scenario I've seen way more times than I would ever wish. And it's primarily a result of this first mistake, which is not tracking your spending in a regular fashion. It's also a result of several of the other spending mistakes I'm going to go into next. But really the most important thing is this couple would have known the discrepancy in what they thought they're spending between what they're actually spending had they had some kind of app or system to track and regularly monitor their spending. Right now, it's actually really easy to solve this problem. Roughly $100 a year gets you access to great apps, a phone or web-based tool like Dave Ramsey's EveryDollar, which basically does all of the heavy lifting for spending tracking. It'll automatically categorize your spending. It'll automatically send them to the right places. All you have to do is get in the app on a regular cadence, something like once every other week or once every month, and categorize the transactions that the app or the algorithm can't. Then once every other week or once every month, you sit down, review your spending behavior, and you can make decisions if I should change or if you should change spending behavior based on what you see in the app. If you're deviating from the amount of spending that your portfolio or saved assets can tolerate, you won't go months or maybe years without knowing that that's the case, forcing you to unretire. Right? So sometimes people go years and years without knowing that, and then they have to go back to work or, catastrophic things happen. The second retirement spending mistake that derails retirees' retirements is not planning for annual expenses. Now, this is a super common mistake I see happen. We tend to forget about annual expenses. We know that they exist, but for some reason we forget to include them in a spending plan or budget. And sometimes that's because they happen at infrequent intervals or they're paid in a lump sum. And so we don't think of them as a monthly installment or a monthly payment. On the screen here, I have the 8 most common annual expenses that I see people forget when they calculate their expense worksheet. The first, and this one isn't always forgotten or missed, but it is a big dollar amount and it is not always planned for in terms of saving for it, is property taxes. You may know that you have to pay property taxes, but if you don't plan an element in your monthly budget or in your distribution budget for the year, you could be out of luck. Then there's insurance premiums. This is homeowners insurance or auto insurance that are usually paid semi-annually or annually, and they often get forgot about. Then there's auto registration, home maintenance, gifts, and travel are 2 of the most common that I see people forget to include in an expense worksheet. Nobody goes through life without spending money on gifts for Christmas or the holidays or whatever. Nobody goes through life without spending money on at least a little bit of travel, especially if you have kids that live in different places, and these are often forgotten about. And then there's tax preparation and annual subscriptions. That's like your Amazon Prime or your Costco or things that renew once a year that we forget about, but the totals end up being substantial. In the second column here to the right of all these categories are the average amounts based on either data I could find on the internet or my own experience anecdotally working with clients. And you can see that they're pretty substantial. The average property tax in the United States is around $4,600 a year. The average insurance premium combination between auto and homeowners is around $4,000 a year. The average auto registration is around $200 a year. Home maintenance is roughly $2,200 a year. I just put in random dollar amounts for gifts and travel. Some people spend far in excess of this. Some people spend far less. And then tax tax preparation and annual subscriptions. And for the purpose of this illustration, I just wanted to show if we go back to that hypothetical couple from the case study that had $2.1 million and miscalculated their spending by $2,000 a month, you can see here how easy that would be if it's just by missing the annual expenses themselves. The monthly total of just the annual expenses I put on here is $1,241, roughly $15,000 a year. And that doesn't even include other discretionary categories that people might mistakenly miscalculate, things like dining out or shopping or other things like that, right? So the question is, how do you solve that? Very simple. You use what I call an annual expense bucketing system. It's also called a profit first system. Essentially what you do is, like I'm showing on the screen, you tally up your annual expenses and you break it into a monthly amount. And then you figure out what your distribution amount would be without annual expenses. You add in that additional annual expense amount broken down into a pro rata 1/12 monthly amount, and you throw that into a savings bucket. Right? You would just take this $1,241, open a new account, throw that money into an annual expense fund, and you can use that fund to either pay directly for your annual expenses or reimburse yourself from that savings slush bucket. But in this way, you actually distribute from your investment accounts that $1,241 as a monthly amount, and it can be more easily and smoothly factored in as an actual distribution from your portfolio, rather than being this scramble where maybe every 4 months you're trying to take a lump sum out of your portfolio because you didn't remember that we have to pay this, lump sum amount at this time. The third big retirement spending mistake, a huge one, is performing Roth conversions when you can't afford them. So I'm a huge fan of Roth accounts. I love Roth conversions when done appropriately, but I think this is a huge internet retirement planning problem, which is that Roth conversions are kind of positioned as just like a catch-all for everybody, that everybody should be doing them as a way to save taxes. And it's just not the case. We're given this recommendation frequently without context for when it may or may not be appropriate. And Roth conversions can be an amazing tool when appropriate, but if they're not appropriate, they actually put your retirement at significant risk, and it happens more often than you think. The reason, and I'll show this on the screen here with some math, is that Roth conversions bring forward a future expense into the present. A tax you would have paid in the future gets paid in the present day. That tax can be considered an expense, and in return, you're hoping for a future tax benefit where you pay less tax. Now, Roth conversions always have a break-even point that can be calculated, where you can find out, if I do this amount of Roth conversion at this tax bracket and I pay this much extra in tax, how many years would it take before I break even on this upfront investment? If we do them without foresight and they're incorrectly applied, they can actually constrain our spending in the present day. So we're going to look at a Roth conversion spreadsheet here to kind of go through exactly when this might be the case, right? To understand when might Roth conversions actually negatively impact someone's spending flexibility and not be worth it in the long run. And we're going to look at two scenarios. The first, it's the case study that was from last week's video, talking about this couple that had $2.1 million in retirement assets, and they were recommended in the financial plan to do very, very modest Roth conversions, almost none, because for two reasons. One is they were going to end their life with mostly Roth assets anyways without having to do conversions. And the second is because it was going to constrain or make their spending too tight at the front end of their retirement to be comfortable. And I'm going to show you exactly how that looks in a second. In this scenario, where they do modest Roth conversions, they're only recommended about $50,000 of Roth conversions, and their distribution rate right here under this RPI category, which is the fancy way of saying distribution rate, is somewhere around 5.5%, close to 6% when they do these modest Roth conversions. Now, let's say they watched internet retirement planning videos and they believe Roth conversions are just the way to go for everybody, and because they have significant assets and a lot of it is in tax deferred accounts, they think that they should just do Roth conversions because that's just the right thing to do. So they force Roth conversions in the first 4 years of their retirement. They do them at filling the 24% tax bracket. So they end up converting something like $700,000 of tax deferred money to Roth money. The problem is the cost for doing that brings their distribution rate up in the first 4 years of retirement from roughly 5.8% to over 11% in some cases here, effectively doubling their distribution rate. And this makes them extremely susceptible to sequence of returns risk, poor market returns, or even just spending emergencies, because they're spending so much money at the front end of their retirement for these Roth conversions that they're placing a significant strain on their retirement. Now, more than that, not just showing the effect of how much more they're distributing to fund these Roth conversions, is what's the net effect at the end. In the first scenario, this couple ends at the end of their 30-year retirement with all Roth money because they spend their taxable and tax-deferred money and leave the Roth. And they end up with an ending portfolio balance of $3,109,000. In the other scenario, they Roth convert and then they spend all their tax-deferred and taxable money. They end up depleting taxable and tax-deferred buckets, and all they have left is Roth money. However, they only have $2.3 million of Roth funds at the end because they spent so much at the front end. And they end up with Roth money only at the end in both scenarios. And you can see that the difference in portfolio value is roughly $772,000. So in this case, it's a very easy, low-hanging fruit, obvious example of when not to do Roth conversions because it's the double whammy. One, they have lower ending portfolio value. And two, they just really constrain their spending at the front end of their retirement and front load tons of risk because of how high the distribution rate would be in the first 4 years of their retirement. The last thing I'll say about Roth conversions, as with any retirement planning action item, is don't take anything as gospel truth. You have to evaluate it critically for your unique situation, and Roth conversions especially is one of those things. The fourth retirement spending mistake that is very common is not considering tax and expense. Taxes are one of your biggest expenses in retirement, and too often we forget to factor in the fact that tax has to be added into our distribution rate because it's a cost of extracting profit from investments, or it's the cost of extracting your funds from retirement accounts. That's just how taxes work. So too often we calculate what we want to spend in retirement, and then we craft a distribution rate based on our desired spending without factoring in the fact that we have to withhold taxes ourselves now that we're retired, which means we need to gross up. We need to add in the tax expense as part of our distribution rate. And I'm going to show you this in a spreadsheet in just a second. The idea here is you can avoid this mistake with proper tax planning, doing exactly what I'm going to show in the spreadsheet here on the screen. The first step here, and this is a very, very simple model to illustrate the problem. Let's say your annual desired spending in retirement is $60,000 per year. You have a starting portfolio value of $1,250,000, which makes your annual distribution rate 4.8%. Now, let's say you're in the 15% marginal or 15% effective tax bracket, and your annual required portfolio income has to be higher. You have to factor in 15% of tax as the cost to extract this $60,000 of desired spending. So what you really need in annual required portfolio income is $70,588 or a distribution rate of 5.65%. In order for you to get $60,000 of spendable money in your hand, you need $70,588 of income, which makes this tax as an expense each year of $10,588. In this way, it's very, very easy to visualize. And when you're crafting your distribution plan each year or thinking about tax each year, you should be thinking about your distribution rate gross. You have to add the tax factor in there and then calculate what your percent distribution rate, and then use that information to determine for yourself whether your plan is too risky or not risky enough, whether you can tolerate that risk, and whether you're comfortable with that level of spending or if spending behaviors need to change. Now, once you understand this concept, the question is, how can you avoid this problem? Like if you expected a 4.8 distribution rate and now you have a 5.65% distribution rate because you didn't think about the tax, what can you do? You can avoid the mistake with proper tax planning. There's two ways to influence that. The first is you can plan your asset location, meaning position your retirement savings into appropriate tax-friendly accounts strategically while you're in the savings phase of your retirement. Now, if you're not in the savings phase of your retirement, Roth conversions is another method of moving your asset location from a less tax-friendly account to a more tax-friendly account. But as you already saw, be very careful about doing it just blindly because you think it's a good idea. Go refer back to that part of this video. And then there's a second way you can influence taxes in retirement, and that's through withdrawal sequencing. Withdrawal sequencing refers to how you time the withdrawals from the mix of different retirement accounts or non-retirement accounts you have to smooth out or soften the tax burden by strategically drawing from the accounts in the most optimal way. Now, if you can't influence your tax liability because your assets already positioned in a specific way, or you simply can't do withdrawal sequencing in an optimal way that is more tax advantageous than just doing it with a standard pro rata method, at the very least, plan for it in a spreadsheet like this. Track your distributions and gross it up for tax. And this leads us to the fifth and final retirement spending mistake, which is following a cookie cutter withdrawal sequence where you just blindly withdraw from taxable accounts first, tax deferred accounts second, and follow it up with Roth accounts third. This is just like the 4% rule. It's one of those hard and fast, very simple rules that helps us avoid decision-making friction, but it actually blinds us to suboptimal outcomes because we don't really understand the trade-offs of following that simple rule. And you can end up in a suboptimal tax situation following this rule and never thinking to look deeper. And as a result, you don't end up optimizing an area that's fully under control. See, the thing is, asset location, where your assets are positioned, and strategically withdrawing them in the right order is something that is fully under your control. Totally unlike the markets, which you cannot influence rates of return or the economy as a broader thing. You cannot influence where the economy will go and where rates of return will go, but you can totally influence where your assets are located and how you perform your withdrawal sequencing. So let me show you on the screen here a really quick example of this activity of what you could plan for when you're thinking about comparing standard withdrawal sequencing, which is the pro rata, just taxable first, tax deferred second, tax-free third, versus a more strategic custom withdrawal sequence that someone might use in a financial plan. In the first scenario here, where you withdraw in the standard order with the same starting amount of assets, same hypothetical scenario, they would have a total amount of income generated by the portfolio over their full retirement of $8,059,000 and a total tax paid of $1,848,000. And those are the two numbers you'd compare against your more custom withdrawal sequencing. In the second scenario here to the right, where we withdraw in a different order, we withdraw in a more custom order that is a blend of the different accounts depending on the individual years we're planning for. This hypothetical case, they would have a total inflows or money generated by their retirement accounts of $8,087,000, which is modest amount, but it's around $30,000 more than in the prior scenario. Nothing sexy, nothing to write home about, but it's something you fully control. And then their total tax would actually be $1,746,000 compared to $1,848,000 for a difference of $102,000 over the lifespan of their retirement. Now, this is a total benefit of $130,000 of extra money that they get to spend. It's their money, or they keep it in their portfolio. It's money retained through this activity of more custom, proper withdrawal sequencing that they can choose to do and totally influence on their own. Again, separate from market returns. It's not something that you have to throw your hands in the air and just pray to the gods. And those are the 5 most common retirement spending mistakes that people make that you can solve for. And so just to repeat them, the first is not using an automated spending tracking tool and monitoring it regularly. The second is not planning for annual expenses. The third is performing Roth conversions when you can't afford them. The fourth is not considering tax as an expense. And the fifth is following a cookie cutter withdrawal sequence where you withdraw from taxable accounts first, tax-deferred accounts second, and Roth accounts third. So hey, once again, I'm Eric, the founder of Peak Financial Planning. If you'd like to learn more about how we help our clients navigate the retirement risk zone, you can visit our website at www.thepeakfp.com. Thank you for your time and attention, and as always, see you in the next video.